As we know, today's objective is to help businesses, large and small, in Africa understand how to access the US government and its vast resources. The second panel that we have today is called Hear It from the Agency Heads. Now, this panel discussion features, among others, the head of Prosper Africa, which is a new US government initiative that brings together the resources of over 17 US government agencies to connect US and African businesses with new buyers, suppliers, and investment opportunities. We are tremendously fortunate to have the Africa heads of the major US agencies that provide resources to global businesses. They have all agreed to join us today in order to share with you the very specifics of how one accesses those resources. Now, we're not only grateful to have the panelists who are joining us on this session, but we have I couldn't imagine a better moderator. We have Dr. Whitney Schneidman, who is a senior international advisor for Africa for Covington. But that belies his true depth of experience. I mean, in addition to that role, Whitney has nearly 40 years of experience working across sub-Saharan Africa. You just heard from the current Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. Whitney actually served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs in the US government. And he's been on the Africa Advisory Committee of the US Office for the Trade Rep and at the US Export-Import Bank. When we mentioned to all of the Africa heads of these agencies who would be moderating this panel today, everybody had universal praise for Whitney and just knew that we had someone who is going to ask tough questions and keep them on point because he knows exactly what they do. Having worked within several of their entities and working closely with the US government for over 40 years, Whitney knows his way around Washington. So with no further ado, I would like to turn this over to Whitney to moderate the second panel of today, which is Hearing It from the Agency Heads. Whitney?
Teresa, thanks for that very warm and kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with these panelists. There's no question that what you have done over, since the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, with Africa.com and bringing so many people together, I think your figure was 25,000, is really quite extraordinary. So hats off to you. And, it's just great to be here on this panel. As you intimated, I sort of know everybody on this panel. I've worked with some have worked with me, but most importantly, we've been having a long conversation about leveraging the private sector in Africa for accelerated economic development. And I think, tied with that is a conversation about strong US-African relations. So I think this panel, indeed the whole session today, is really reflective of that. So before I jump in, let me just introduce my panelists. Tori Whitney is the Chief Operating Officer of Prosper Africa. Ramsey Day is the Assistant Administrator for Africa at USAID. Worku Gachu is the Managing Director for Africa at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. C.D. Glynn is the President of the U.S. Africa Development Foundation. And Brad McKinney is Vice President for Economic Security and Operations. And he also heads the program on China and transformational exports at the U.S. Export-Import Bank. So we have an all-star crew, as you said, Teresa. So let's just jump into it. And let me start with you, Tori, because Prosper Africa is sort of the big light of the Trump administration. And I know you've been working so hard at it. It's an all-of-government approach. But for our listeners out there, what is the key one or two things they need to know about Prosper Africa, and how can they access your resources? And thirdly, what resources do you have to make available to them so they can better their business on the continent? Over to you.
Thanks, Whitney. It's a pleasure to be here, and I trust you'll let me know if you have any issues hearing me. I appreciate the question, but I also appreciate the contributions you've made to Prosper Africa, and really pleased to be joined with so many of my colleagues from across multiple participating Prosper Africa agencies. So it's a big multifaceted question, but I'll do my best to be brief and break it down for the audience. I think that the design and the intention of the US government's Prosper Africa initiative has really been long outlined and discussed. So I'm really excited today for the opportunity for myself and my colleagues to focus on the initiative's progress, its impact, and I think most importantly, to provide really actionable information, in this case to African businesses, on just precisely how to access the resources of the US government through the administration's new Prosper Africa initiative. I think it's been touched upon, but really what's differentiating our approach from previous approaches is that you have 17 US government agencies, often challenging to navigate, operating as one and in tandem with one another. And that's true of operations on the continent as well as in the United States in Washington. And we're bringing all together those services and resources which are unique to each of the different agencies and departments that you'll hear more about today, in order to help in a more efficient and a more focused way than ever before, investors and exporters to identify new partners, advance opportunities, and really to close deals. And some of those tools in that toolkit that touches matchmaking, due diligence, financing, advisory services, and much more. And I am really pleased to share that through these efforts in Prosper Africa's very first year, we directly supported more than 280 deals to close. And that was across more than 30 African countries and totaled over $22 billion. And I think for the purposes of our audience today, it's important to note that a lot of those deals that we supported included support to small and medium-sized African enterprises. Those SMEs are really the engines of our economies and a real focus of the initiative. Please feel free to interrupt, Whitney, but I thought I'd offer one example, if time permits. Do you feel it does?
Yeah, one example, then I'm going to come to you with a question.
Good, that sounds good. All right, well, one example, let's take Field Intelligence is a healthcare technology company based in Nigeria, and they recently received transaction advisory support from USAID as part of their toolkit to advance Prosper Africa. And they use that to complete a $3.6 million investment round. And they'll use that investment to scale up tech that helps pharmacies inventory, stock high quality medicines, which is particularly relevant in the wake of COVID. So just one example that might resonate with this group, and we'll hand it back over to you, Whitney, for a follow-up.
Okay, great, Tori. So if I'm an entrepreneur in Lagos or Mombasa or Kinshasa or Goma or anywhere on the continent, and I need some of your real-time information, or I need to get in touch with your toolkit, how do I do it?
Great question. So I would first encourage that entrepreneur, wherever you are, to get started by going to Prosper Africa's brand new digital resource center, and that's hosted at prosperafrica.dfc.gov, a really good place for someone to start to get a holistic understanding of what this looks like at large. It's really that one-stop shop for learning about, as well as accessing, all of the US government's resources that we have to support trade and investment. So you can find the right tool for your specific business need. And through that site, you can actually reach out directly to Prosper Africa team members who will help you, and they'll connect you with the right US government representative for follow-up across any of those agencies if it's appropriate. But I should note, Whitney, that there's really no wrong place to enter. The whole point of this is not to make it more complicated. So whether that entrepreneur were to approach a point of contact at their respective embassy or any agency, you're going to get into the same funnel of that fully orchestrated coordination across the government.
Okay, great. Well, we'll come back to that, sure. Thanks, Tori. Let me pivot to Worku. Worku, it was almost 2 years ago that Congress passed the BUILD Act, which doubled the size of OPIC and created the U.S. Development Finance Corporation from a $30 billion entity to a $60 billion entity, and sort of gave this new organization, the DFC, capability to invest equity in projects. So in that 2 years, I know you've been quite busy. I think you've hit the ground running, if not sprinting. So can you just sort of give us a flavor of what the DFC has done, and what do you see as your signature success in the nearly 24 months since the DFC has been in business?
Sure. Thanks so much, Whitney. And let me start by thanking Teresa and the Africa.com team for organizing this session. They've done a tremendous job over the years ensuring that Africa gets the attention that it deserves. But yeah, like you said, we've hit the ground running at the DFC. So our new tools and authorities came online January of this year, right? And from within that time frame, right, spent a lot of kind of thoughtful back of the house work, ensuring that our processes were in place to actually utilize these new tools. And then beginning in March, we began deploying the new tools. And so, like you mentioned, with the new agency came along our ability to invest equity. We actually have now a focus on low income and lower middle income countries, a concentration of whom are on the continent. We also have been given some flexibility with regards to our U.S. nexus, and this ensures that if there is a transaction that aligns with our development, our foreign policy, and our commercial return objectives, we could support them even though there might be minimal U.S. nexus here. And we think that's important in terms of driving development. And so, with these new tools, we see it as a way for us to really double down on the continent. Currently we have $8.2 billion invested, and our growth objective is to increase that number 10% year over year for the next 5 years. And so working with our Prosper Africa colleagues and other colleagues within the interagency, right, I think you see a whole suite of tools here that, put together can really help drive forward a transaction. One thing, since you just spoke about equity, what's exciting about the equity product, historically, OPIC was somewhat reactive. People would come to us with a proposal, with a project, we would evaluate it, say yes or no, and then move on. Now, just given the nature of the financial product, right, equity allows us to be much more proactive, right? If we hear or come across a business or an opportunity that we think aligns with our AAA goals, right, we can go out there and support them. And so this is an exciting shift in terms of how we approach origination.
So is the DFC open for business in all 54 countries in Africa?
We are open for business in all countries except for one, and so and we are very much sector agnostic, right? I think recognizing that there are many sectors that will achieve the continent's development goals, right? We are quite open in our sectors as well.
And my next question may be akin to asking a parent to choose their best kid, but what's been the most interesting project that you've put together?
What's been that's tough. If you
want me to come back to it, I will. But just to give a little flavor of what's been a game changer that you've been involved in.
There's been so many cool ones, and I guess what's great about DFC and our new tools, right? We can do a smaller transaction for $1 or $2 million that have extreme, development impacts, or we can do a transaction that's worth $800 million, right? And so we capture the full breadth of various ticket sizes. One deal that I'm extremely proud of is our investment into a company called Akola. They are actually a member of the PAC DBIA, and Akola is a jewelry manufacturer based in northern Uganda that hires disenfranchised women. And the leadership of Akola recognized that inputs don't need to be exported out of the continent raw. There's the capabilities to actually create value-added high-end jewelry on the continent and exporting that to the US. And so the Akola team works with disenfranchised women all throughout northern Uganda and sell, beautiful products at Neiman Marcus, Bloomingdale's,
That's great.
Nordstrom's. And, that was I think a $5 million investment. So it was on the smaller end. But recognizing that, there's huge development impacts, there's the US business nexus as well. So it just hit all the high marks for us.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thanks, Worku. I'll come back to you a little bit with some more questions. CD,
Sure.
Let me go over to you as president of the US African Development Foundation. Maybe folks don't know as much about it as they should, but I know it as a foundation that punches way above its weight. And as an organization that really has its fingers on the pulse of businesses across the African continent. So in this new configuration, in this new era of Prosper Africa and the DFC, what is new about what you're doing on the continent related to this effort to deepen the commercial relationships between Africa and the US?
Great, thanks Whitney, and I appreciate you for all you've done for U.S. foreign policy towards Africa over the years. Obviously want to give a great shout out and appreciation to Teresa and the Africa.com team. Really grateful for this opportunity to share a little bit more about USADF, U.S. African Development Foundation, which is sort of this small grant maker that makes big impact, as you said, across the continent. When we look at our work to invest directly in grassroots, small and medium-sized enterprises to promote locally driven economic development, ultimately to create pathways to prosperity where we're impacting lives and livelihoods, one of the things that's really important now more than ever is really seeing USADF and our grants and our financial capital as a tool in the toolkit. And so when you hear Worku talk about the DFC and a $5 million investment on the front end in Akola, we're on the front end of that maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so we're really in the early stage area of enterprise creation that really does lead to poverty alleviation and enterprise development. And so that early stage of what role do grants play? What role does catalytic capital play in developing African enterprises and African entrepreneurs? And so one thing that's really important to us now more than ever as a player, as a tool in the foreign assistance toolkit for Africa, is to really see our role linked in that continuum of capital, in that where you're talking about large scale investments in potential equity, or on the front end of that, where's the catalytic capital to de-risk even loans or to de-risk other investment from the private sector or other agencies. And so we have three unique tools that we bring to the toolkit. One is that capital and this grant capital. We're a grant maker, but we ultimately want to make change. And so we're using grants and blended finance, some level of philanthropic capital with debt to really create the right kind of capital needed for early stage enterprises and early stage entrepreneurs. And we only invest in African owned and operated entities. So also we're really on the front lines of creating the early stage African entrepreneurs and enterprises that will grow and scale to be trade and investment partners with the US. So really linking our early stage investments with the longer term vision for Prosper and two-way trade and investment. So that capital is important, but also capacity building. And so we bring a network across 21 countries across the continent of local implementing partners who provide that non-financial support to these African enterprise and entrepreneurs. And this is project management support, management, finance capabilities. And these are African organizations that are doing business development, business advisory to every grant that we make. And so it's the early stage capital, but it's also the business development advisory support by local African organizations who are indigenous and have the local context for what those entrepreneurs need. So the capital is there, the capacity building and technical assistance, but ultimately, Whitney, one thing is a connection. So we've been successful throughout the past 40 years of USADF coming out of the 80s and now in 2020, we've been really successful in the startup, in the cooperative, in the early stage entrepreneurial businesses. But now we really see our grant capital, our early stage investment needs to be linked to follow-on funding. And so really positioning those entrepreneurs for greater connections. And again, those connections can be to other U.S. government agencies and entities. So we're doing a handoff, a baton pass. You know, we did the early stage, and we're passing them along, but also to the private sector. And one of the things that's more important now is that everyone's looking for deals, right? We hear this all the time,
Right.
you know, deals. And we have a number of entrepreneurs and enterprises and early stage entities that we supported that capital, supported them with grant capital, but then are we letting 1,000 flowers bloom and then let them die? Are we linking them to others who are looking for that like investment? So one of the things with Prosper is a greater connective tissue of linking our early stage support to grassroots development and SMEs to other US government entities, but also to the private sector, and being intentional about that. The one thing that's really different, Whitney, is the intentionality that we care about investing directly in those businesses, in those enterprises, in those cooperatives, but we also care about where they go after us.
Right. So CD, what's the average size of your investment?
Great question. So we don't make any grant investments or even a blended finance perspective in terms of grants larger than 250,000. So
Wow.
we go to 250,000.
Right.
And this is the beginning of what's known as that missing middle. You're too big for microfinance, but you're too small for maybe a financial institution. And so we want to catalyze and really play that signature role in that missing middle of up to $250,000 of grant capital. Again, it could be linked to investment capital, it could be on its own, but it's really playing a signature role in getting those businesses to from startup to scale up.
Right. And you mentioned 21 countries. You're open in 21 countries. Are those like least developed income? How do you decide those 21 countries?
It's a combination of the LECs, but also really thinking about where the greatest needs are. So all of our countries predominantly are in the Horn of Africa, and this is from South Sudan and Somalia and Uganda. So we're in the Horn of Africa, we're in the Sahel, we're all throughout the Sahel, and then the Great Lakes regions. We still do have programs in Southern Africa, in places like Zambia and Malawi and Tanzania, but predominantly most of our focus is on those where are the most underserved populations, where is there conflict or post-conflict, where is startup catalytic capital really needed? Because as we look at the growth story of Africa, we see a number of countries and communities being left behind and underserved. Right. So where is there a real need for catalytic capital for the most marginalized, underserved populations, where you find smallholder farmers with no access to market, where you find refugees, where you find, you know, the levels of migration highest. So we want to be in those places where early stage local economic development can catalyze real transformational growth, and we're in that first phase to really serve the underserved in those places.
Great, CD, that's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Ramsey, let me pivot over to you, and let's talk about what was first the trade hubs, then they became the trade and investment hubs, and now I understand they're about to have a third incarnation. But many of us know that facility as one of the big connectors of companies on the continent who want to take advantage of AGOA, and more recently, U.S. companies who want to understand the market better. But tell us where the trade hubs are going.
Well, thanks, Whitney. Great to see you, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Delighted to be here, and appreciate the invitation from Teresa and the Africa.com team. Yeah, so I certainly don't want to steal Tori's thunder because I know she's going to probably talk about this a bit later. But yeah, I mean, USAID has historically had regional trade and investment hubs that provide business services kind of all across the continent, and has a wide range of services. There's been such a demand for these services from the regional trade hubs that we're actually modernizing that model to try to meet that demand. So we're really excited about this, but we're in the process of launching a new Prosper Africa Trade and Investment Program, which will build on and expand the services that were originally provided in the trade hubs. So it's a different way of doing business for us, and we'll offer a wide range of services, including deal facilitation support, business-to-business facilitation, investor matchmaking that Tori also mentioned, but also what I think is really critical in this effort is targeting the really critical policy reforms that'll help create the healthy business environments. And this is something that USAID has historically done, but we're really elevating this priority to really work on the business enabling environment all across the continent, because I think we would all probably agree that this is one of the biggest challenges that American investors are looking for when they're looking for investment partners in African businesses is there a consistent application of the law? Is there a commitment to rule of law? Is there a functioning adjudication process? So these are critical to that element of attracting American businesses to partner with African businesses. And we think that the Prosper Africa Trade and Investment Program is going to be a real key support mechanism for that business-to-business linkage.
So Ramsey, you're touching on a critical issue, because I think one of the constraints on U.S. investment in Africa is the perception of risk. But what you just spoke about was, strengthening the enabling environment for investment. So what metrics do you use? I mean, there are 54 countries, it's finite amount of resources. How do you engage in this critical task of strengthening the enabling environment for investors?
And so it's an excellent question. And the issue of risk is something that comes up when we were engaging with U.S. companies. We look at, while it's not the only factor that drives U.S. Foreign assistance on the African continent, it is certainly one that we have to factor in. We have a number of tools that we take a look at. We now have what's called a USAID Journey to Self-Reliance Roadmap, which is available on the USAID website, which gives us a little bit of a snapshot as to where countries are in terms of their journey towards self-reliance. And we look at that in two metrics. One is their capacity, meaning how far along are they on that journey, but then also the commitment side, which is how committed is the government? And that gives us a little bit of a visual. It's not determinative, meaning that doesn't determine our budget levels for a particular country, but it does give us an idea of which countries are committed and which ones are really lagging in that. And that helps us message to those countries that we're talking with American companies and they are interested in investing. However, there's reluctance there simply because that risk is too high, meaning you've got to focus on demonstrating that you are actually committed to your country's development through that rule of law, through the economic policy reform, so that we can get the countries more integrated into the international economic system.
And a demonstration of that commitment, is it fair to say that if a country is at the bottom of the perceptions of transparency, perceptions of corruption index for, let's say, 10 years, that country's not committed? But if we see a government make incredible progress, move 20, 30 slots over 5 years, is that the kind of government that you would want to work with?
That's exactly right. Particularly USAID, kind of the sweet spot for us are some of the countries that may be lagging on the capacity side, but are high on the commitment side. And the metrics that we use have about 17 or so indicators that are built into the roadmaps. So we're capturing a lot of those metrics that are third-party, independent. This is not U.S. government owned information. This is open source information. And so it's all there on our website, but there's also other resources that are out there as well. But if those countries are making progress, then those are the countries that we're certainly going to target for higher priority. I would also add too that this is the third year that we've released those roadmaps, and so we now have some trends that we can now track, which is critical, and that's really ultimately what we're looking for.
And my last question concerns capacity building and what USAID is doing in this space when it comes to training folks in business and the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, so this is USAID's bread and butter. This is a huge element of what USAID has done for 6 or 7 decades on the African continent. I would also note too that we're really trying to transform the way in which we do business. And we fundamentally want to change the relationship between the US and African countries from an aid-based relationship to a trade and investment-based relationship. And so the business-to-business catalyzing, facilitating and enabling that business-to-business relationship is really at the core of, in my opinion, the future of USAID. And this is really critical to our contribution to Prosper Africa, which is why we're so excited about it. But we're really trying to transform essentially the way USAID has worked in the future. That's not to say that we're going to lessen the priority of our humanitarian assistance or our global health work. That's a reflection of our values. And so those will always be there. but we really have never prioritized that business to business support. And we're really looking at ways in which we can transform the agency from that perspective, because I really believe it's the future of our agency. That's why we're so excited about playing a leading role in the Prosper Africa initiative, because this really is merging the core functions of USAID, which has been to support the business enabling environment in a particular country, with the overall goals of Prosper Africa, which is significantly increasing two-way trade between the US and African countries.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Ramsey. So Bradley, over to you. Certainly, maybe last, but definitely not least, because it's clear that EXIM is back in action. You've got a quorum at the board, so you can make decisions, you can make deals, you can finance projects. And it's fair to say that your $5 billion financing of the energy infrastructure in Mozambique, I think, caught everyone's attention, just given the significance of that project. Can you talk a little bit about this deal and what it signifies? You know, I mean, it's clear that the U.S., you know, has been seeing China very active in the infrastructure space. Is this an indication that the U.S. wants to be playing in a more significant way in Africa's infrastructure? Or, you know, is this just going to be a one-off?
No, it's absolutely an indicator. Just to answer your question straight up from the top, let me just back up and just, you know, echo the thanks, my thanks for your hosting this, moderating this, and to the Africa.com team for including EXIM and all of us. I think for the participants, you should recognize that the collective dedication among these U.S. government representatives to enhancing the commercial relationship with Africa is pretty awesome. And indeed, the Mozambique LNG project is a great example of the whole of government approach that the U.S. is taking and leveraging all of the commercial tools we have in our toolbox to make things like that happen. So, look, I'm pretty sure that this is well known, but just for those that don't know about the project itself, in September 2019, EXIM's board of directors authorized a direct loan of up to $4.7 billion to support the export of U.S. goods and services for the development and construction of an integrated LNG project in northern Mozambique. So, you know, the project, I don't have to tell you, is expected to have a transformative impact on Mozambique's economy, support thousands of local jobs, and create wealth and reduce poverty. And oh, by the way, it supports over 16,000 jobs in the U.S. across 8 states. So you talk about mutually beneficial trade investment, which is exactly what we, the U.S. government, and specifically Prosper Africa, are trying to achieve. So, you know, this is absolutely an indicator of additional infrastructure and otherwise deals. To Worker's point earlier, we are sector agnostic. We want to do lending of all sorts across the continent. So yes, we're back in business, to your point, and looking to do more of this type of investment.
So Bradley, give us a little insight in terms of what the supply chain looks like on a $5 billion project like this. Presumably it's an American company that came to EXIM, but also presumably that American company is working with a lot of local companies in Mozambique. Just flesh that out a little bit for us.
Yeah, that's right. So this predates my time at EXIM, but this is really a deal that was 8 years in the making. It started, I believe, with conversations with Anadarko. You know, the deal through acquisitions and so forth has sort of taken on a different life. But as I said, there are a number of U.S. suppliers to the project. You know, services, equipment, you know, you name it, to the tune of 16,700 jobs. So it's quite the supply chain, and it's quite the ripple effect when it comes to U.S. exporters. You know, underpinning all of this is, I sort of glossed over in EXIM 101, which is that we, you know, our job is to support American jobs by financing the export of U.S. goods and services. So you know, our contribution to the project is providing financing so that U.S. exporters can provide those goods and services to help with the construction and development of the project. So this is one of the biggest transactions in our history. as I said, huge ripple effect for us and hopefully for African businesses as well.
Great, thanks so much for that. So I have a couple questions that have come in from the participants. So let me just sort of ask a couple of those and start with you, Tori. There's an entrepreneur from Abuja, Nigeria, who has asked if he can get help from Prosper Africa to secure investments to get involved with U.S. franchisees, such as McDonald's or Burger King. Is that something that Prosper Africa can help this entrepreneur with?
Thanks, Whitney, and my colleagues for all of their comments so far today, and to our friend in Abuja who has asked, yes, Prosper Africa can assist you. I mean, fundamentally, we want to take inquiry and identified opportunity and suss that out across the range of support services that the U.S. government has to offer. I do think it's important for me to add and be candid that the likelihood of support from the U.S. government does increase with a certain amount of project preparation. So those businesses that have really well-developed business plans and detailed investment prospects are the most likely to be well suited for instance, financing in this case, perhaps from the United States, but would encourage that entrepreneur to connect with Prosper Africa from any entry point and allow that to be reviewed across the interagency, and then for us to be able to make a suggestion about the right tool that might most benefit that opportunity.
So you're suggesting they might want to get in touch with CD first and do a little
yes, we're going to give them his cell phone number.
Yeah, perfect. Let me ask Worku, a question came in from a management consultant at McKinsey in Nairobi, who's asking about risk and how does the US government differentiate among African countries based on varying levels of country risk. How do you deal with that at the DFC? If you're open for business in 53 countries, how does risk come into the equation when you're assessing whether to make an investment?
No, that's a great question. And you always see that perennial struggle between our credit and risk committees and our investment originators who want to get deals done, right? And one of the exciting things about the DFC and the transition from OPIC is, our kind of risk on tolerance, recognizing that, the development finance community has a really important role to play, right, in terms of our additionality and providing financing where, the private sector isn't suitable or considers it too risky. And so, the one thing that I'm super proud of is that, we conduct our own underwriting and our own diligence. We have some of the best project finance and SME finance specialists in-house. And so each of our investment teams conduct their own risk analysis and their own diligence. And this is, this is hefty work. I mean, it's not something where, you'll reach out to us with a proposal and you get an answer back in a few weeks. I mean, this is a couple months process. Our teams will fly out from Washington to your project site. We'll conduct interviews with business owners. We'll do a market assessment to check to confirm market opportunities, and then that begins our internal underwriting process. We also rely on our colleagues at our embassies and USAID missions in the region, right? They have a lot of local expertise and a lot of on-the-ground knowledge, and so that is something that we definitely rely on as well.
Yeah, that's great. So just quickly back to you, Tori. I mean, I think Worku just touched on something. Is that this is sort of a Washington-based conversation. But we have embassies in virtually every African continent. So can you just give us a little flavor of if you're a business person, in Zambia, in Tanzania, does it make sense to try to reach out to the U.S. Embassy to start the conversation, or should they just go online and connect with you?
Thanks, Whitney. I appreciate that. So I believe one of the great accomplishments of the Prosper Africa initiative thus far, at least on the U.S. government coordination piece, is the fact that we have established these teams at every single embassy on the continent that are dedicated to looking at two-way trade and investment opportunities and advancing them. So when you have a foreign commercial service officer present, a State Department econ officer, representatives from USAID, in some instances the DFC as well, they are working as a harmonized unit. So if you are a local African business, engaging with your embassy absolutely is a suitable approach in order to inquire about how might I receive some assistance from the US government. And again, I don't want that to deter anyone from engaging on the Washington side either, if that's via prosperafrica@usaid.gov. You can email, and we are all speaking to one another. So any place that you come in, you're going to get the breadth of the full response of the US government.
Yeah. So in the previous panel, Tibor referred to deal teams.
Yes.
What's a deal team? How does that work? And how does the entrepreneur access a deal team?
Absolutely. So what is the deal team? The deal team is an interagency group of folks at the embassy in your country that are reviewing on a weekly basis leads and opportunities and inquiries for how the Prosper Africa initiative will advance two-way trade and investment. And how do you approach a deal team? You can contact your local embassy, but you can also come directly to us via the online digital resource center by emailing prosperafrica@usaid.gov. And the very first thing that I'm going to do if I receive that email is reach out to the field and to post and understand from their perspective, is this a viable opportunity? How can we help advance to this opportunity? So again, it's not to sidestep the question, but to very earnestly say that they can come at any entry point.
Right. So you can go online to connect with Prosper Africa, or you can call up the embassy, ask the embassy operator to connect you with the deal team, and you're up and running.
Absolutely. And one point I will note is we're working very hard in exploring the feasibility with our State Department colleagues to have direct email addresses for a point of contact at every post where there is a Prosper Africa deal team present, which are at all of them, to ensure that perhaps you can even make that more seamless than picking up the phone and calling the embassy operator and have a direct email inbox for every post. That's something we're exploring and working on, and I hope to be able to advance quickly.
Awesome. That sounds great. Sidi, let me ask you a question that came from a CEO of a media production company in Port Harcourt. You sort of intimated that is remarks, but this individual notes that a significant portion of Nigeria's GDP and its employment comes from the media sector, and specifically Nollywood. And this individual's interested to know whether ADF can help the creative sectors in Africa when deciding to make an investment. I realize this may not be part of the conflict and post-conflict environment, but have you worked in this critical sector in Africa?
Great. No, I think it's a great question. Ultimately, we're looking at whatever the business opportunity, is it going to increase incomes, create jobs, grow revenues that are going to impact a local population of people? And so that's one of the first lenses that we look at: the social impact assessment, the economic impact assessment of the opportunity. Where we have seen, and most of our funding goes to the areas of highest need in terms of where most Africans earn their livelihoods. And so we have, 70% of all our investments are somewhere along the agricultural supply chain. More recently, that's also linked to US government priorities with the Global Food Security Act and Feed the Future. We then look at power. And so Africa's need for power, especially in those underserved places and populations. And so with Power Africa and off-grid energy, we're in solar, wind, biogas, biodigesters. But in the area that you know really well, Whitney, from the YALI, the Young African Leaders Initiative, we do fund a number of agnostic entrepreneurs, especially young people who are looking at opportunities to increase incomes, create jobs, grow revenues, and really build local economic empowerment. And that's where we have seen some investments with young entrepreneurs who are in the running social enterprises that are in the creative industry. And that is where in the entrepreneurial realm is where we have funded the creative industries and people looking at really creative solutions around media usage and video production and ICT writ large to really impact local challenges, somewhat around agriculture, energy, or education, but looking at it from an entrepreneurial lens. And so while it isn't a sector that we focus on, because we're focused primarily on those drivers that really create employment opportunities, that really increase incomes in terms of entrepreneurship, agriculture, and energy, in the creative industries, through entrepreneurship and social enterprises, we have seen real opportunities. And Nigeria in particular is a place where we have had some of those investments. We also have a relationship with the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. So in Lagos State, we do work with the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund to co-fund investments, and some of those investments are in ICT and media and the creative industries, and that's Lagos State specific. So not core to our work, but not outside of the realm of possibility. Right. In terms of broader investments in entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So CD, let's just drill down on, I'm interested in that relationship with Lagos State, sort of the public-private partnership. Do you have relationships like that in other parts of the continent?
One of the great value, the answer is yes, and one of the great value propositions that USAID brings, because of all of our investments are in African enterprises and African entrepreneurs, so we don't invest in American companies. We can facilitate relationships with American companies that want to invest in African businesses. So we're on the demand side, creating the burgeoning African private sector that can buy U.S. goods and services or supply U.S. goods and services to American businesses. So the B2B is where we live, but on the creating the African businesses that can trade and invest with the U.S. There are many nations: Uganda, Senegal, Nigeria with Lagos State, Benin, Malawi, Cote d'Ivoire. All of those nations, they actually co-fund alongside USAID.
That's awesome.
Whitney. And so in Uganda and Benin and Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire and Lagos State, we put down, for instance, $2 million a year that's going to small grants to African enterprise and entrepreneurs. Lagos State matches that funding. Ugandan government matches that funding. So then we deploy, if it's $2 million, we deploy in Cote d'Ivoire $4 million, $2 million of US taxpayer dollars to fund African grassroots SMEs, and $2 million from the Ivorian government. And we program $4 million that's going directly to Ivorian entrepreneurs. And again, this is in Uganda, this is in Lagos State, this is in Senegal. And so the African governments really use the American influence and our ability to reach those underserved populations, to reach their own people. And so for them, it's not really funding the US government, it's using our expertise and our connections to really build better African businesses. And so the Lagos State is one example, but across the continent, this is one of the unique value propositions that we bring, because we have the gift authority to take African governments' money and to then redeploy it back to places and populations that are hard to reach even for them, but it creates this local economic development that is driven by American ingenuity, but African ownership and local ownership by the communities in which we're investing that money.
And how do you find those businesses? You know, so and how do they find you?
Great, and that's the number one question, right? How do I get a grant from USAID? So there are some closed pool opportunities, and closed pools meaning through the YALI network, the Young African Leaders Network. And so we invest in YALI entrepreneurs that are coming through the embassy. A new initiative, the Academy for Women's Entrepreneurship, spearheaded by the State Department. Those graduates of the Academy for Women's Entrepreneurship, we have a closed pool of funding available to them. But we have RFPs, we have solicitations, we have challenges. We've done Women in Energy Challenge across 7 countries. We've done a off-grid energy challenge for solar, wind, hydro, bio, early stage African enterprises throughout the Sahel, and it was called the Sahel Off-Grid Energy Challenge. So through challenges, through RFPs, through solicitations, but most importantly, in every country, just like we're a part of the deal teams in those embassies, we also have a local country office in 21 countries. We have a country program coordinator who anyone can go to talk about when we're going to be open and accepting proposals, what the funding level will look like, and the opportunities that we're trying to catalyze and to fund. And the most important thing is to think through, what problem are you solving? Because we're in, again, that business of really trying to look at the social impact and the economic impact, and in some instances in the African space, the environmental impact of those enterprises that we would support. So think through what problem you're solving, what solution you're trying to catalyze, and how the funding that ADF can provide is catalytic and can be an impact multiplier to other funding you might get or other investments that you might need. And so we want to play a unique role in starting and scaling up enterprises, but ultimately, Whitney, to your question before, we want to link them to follow-on funding. That could be private investors from the U.S. or throughout Africa. And so we're really in this business of trying to create real linkages between early stage enterprises that can then develop, grow, and ultimately scale through greater connections with other forms of capital.
Great, thanks. Well, Ramsey, let me go to you. CD made reference several times to YALI and the Young Africa Leaders Network, which is probably one of the most dynamic programs that the U.S. has developed over the last decades. Can you just give us a little flavor of how YALI fits into the Prosper Africa dynamic? Is the point of contact the regional leadership centers? Is it the Mandela Washington Fellows? I mean, the YALI participants that I've met have just been extraordinary individuals, and just would love to understand better how that piece fits into this conversation.
Sure, of course. No, you're absolutely right. YALI is an incredible program, and the young professionals that go through that program are just absolutely extraordinary. And I'm incredibly inspired every time I get a chance to see them, and hopefully we'll see them again when we get back to the continent. USAID is quite decentralized, as you know, and I think always the best point of contact is going to be the USAID mission in that particular country. We have missions and offices in almost 40 countries around Africa, and so that's always going to be the very first point of contact. Now, I do believe that there's incredible synergies between YALI and Prosper Africa, simply because we are always looking for young entrepreneurs, which is, as you know, one of the pillars of YALI. And so ways in which we can make linkages between the Prosper Africa partners, meaning those that we have been in contact with from the Prosper Africa perspective. Sorry. We got a little visitor here, but also, but those YALI participants in many ways are starting businesses. They're actually beginning in their careers in a particular company, and so we absolutely want to use YALI as a source to really feed into the overall goals of Prosper Africa. But the best way to get in touch with the YALI program, or to be that synergy between perhaps Prosper Africa and the YALI program, is always going to be the USAID mission at Post, as well as even whether it be the deal teams or the State Department officers at Post, but anybody within the embassy construct can assist.
Great. Ramsey, I got a question here from a finance director of a mobile telco from Kigali, who is interested in learning how AID has adapted to the COVID environment. How, we can't travel, we've got to be much more, adept at making use of the digital environment. How is this played out in the work of USAID in Africa?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We believe it or not, it's really been quite seamless. We transitioned to the Google platform several years ago, which I think has been, a remarkable transformation for USAID in terms of our own operations. So we really haven't seen any major disruption in our own operational approach, and the vast majority of our programs are moving on. So there shouldn't be much concern about how USAID operates in country. And so we're moving forward as aggressively as we ever have been.
And a lot of folks working remotely?
We are. There are many who are returning. We did have a global authorized departure. So we, in March and April, a lot of people did leave, and some stayed, but they're really on their way back. And so we're seeing a significant return to those missions. However, it really has not impacted our ability to do our jobs and to project our work and manage our programs. So people are working remotely from all around the world, but we're starting to see them start to trickle back.
Great, thanks for that. Bradley, I got a question from a head of corporate banking at a global bank based in Nairobi, who's interested in procurement and what can be done to support governments to improve their procurement practices. And just curious, is this something that falls under EXIM's ambit?
Well, I think so. And I think I'd answer that by saying, you know, we're a bank. The transactions that we finance must be bankable, reasonable assurance of return, and so forth. There are risks associated with any buyer, public or private. But, you know, we've talked about sort of where we're open. EXIM is open for business in 48 of the 54 countries across Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we've got a number of things that we consider when it comes to risk. But, you know, our borrowers are sovereign or sub-sovereign governments, public center entities, or private sector buyers. So it really runs the gamut. So I think the short answer would be yes. I think that the procurement, you know, advising that we would provide would come during sort of the loan application process. But I hope that answers the question from the gentleman.
Right. Well, I think it's certainly going to be an ongoing concern. Let me follow up with another question that came in from Hermanos, from the CEO of a green energy company. And, you know, you mentioned the LNG project in Mozambique. What else are you doing in the energy space, in the green energy space? And can you say a little bit how EXIM's work links up with Power Africa?
Yes, well, there are a number of projects we have in the renewable energy efficiency, energy storage space, and looking to do more. Let me just take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the program on China and transformational exports, which was part of our December 2019 reauthorization. It basically charges EXIM with advancing American comparative leadership in 10 transformational export categories, one of which is, as I said, renewable energy efficiency, and energy storage. So, you know, the charge is quite simply to lean into transactions in those sectors, and energy is a big one. We have had a number of engagements over the years in the Power Africa initiative that we very much hope to continue. As we mentioned earlier, the Mozambique deal is one of which we are very proud. It's one of EXIM's largest ever, and indeed one of the largest ever on the continent. So I think that's a clear indicator of our willingness to lean into this industry and transactions therein.
Yeah, but Ramsey, let me go back to you, because I know Power Africa's housed at USAID. Can you just give us an update on where the program is today?
Sure, of course. Power Africa is moving forward just as it ever has. It's really done a terrific job in advancing the mandate of bringing electricity to those in need within Africa. As you know, the mandate of Power Africa takes an all of the above approach, but green energy and renewable energy is one of the primary focuses of Power Africa. They've done north of 130 deals in terms of bringing them to financial closure, many of which have been in the renewable energy side, particularly in solar. And they're looking at, and they're pursuing a number of solar opportunities as well. So it's going like gangbusters. We've got a great team working on it, and it's doing well.
Yeah, great. Well, I can see that we're sort of at the end of our time here. I would just be remiss if I didn't talk about just Covington for 1 minute. And you know, I'm just proud to chair the Africa practice at Covington. We have more than 100 attorneys in our offices in the US, Europe, Africa, Asia. We have a Johannesburg office that's Africa facing. We work in project finance. We work on compliance. We work on what we call global problem solving, and just feel like we're part of this conversation. We're part of working with US government agencies to deepen the US African engagement. We work hard to leverage the private sector for accelerated economic development. And it's just been a privilege to be able to moderate this conversation. And so let me thank all the participants and turn it back to you, Teresa.
Well, thank you, Whitney. And I will underscore the little commercial you give for Covington there. Even though I've known you for a long time, I've had an opportunity to get to know Covington since you joined the practice, and that has given us a platform to engage on many efforts, this one being one of them. I want to thank you, Whitney, for moderating this panel. And I want to thank all of the panelists. Everyone says how hard we work, and we work extremely hard, but it doesn't feel like work when you get a chance to work with friends. And that's certainly been the case in reaching out to Whitney, to Worko and CD. Thank you, as people I've known for a long time, for joining this panel. And the good thing is, even though this may be virtual, I found in doing these webinar series, you actually can make new friends virtually. And so my new friends that I have made and didn't have an opportunity to work with previously are Tori, Ramsey, and Bradley. And so I certainly have learned a lot about the important work that each of you do in your respective platforms. And I hope that you will join us back on Africa.com in other contexts in the future. And I'd also like, while we're on this particular panel, to just thank one of Tori's colleagues, Nina Prier, who has been very, very helpful to us in assembling the speakers for this panel. So thank you very much. We want to make sure, this panel is a real nuts and bolts panel. You've heard now from the Africa heads at 5 different agencies across the US government that help businesses in Africa, small and large, in a variety of ways to improve trade, investment, and technical assistance. And we want to make sure you know how to reach them. So here is specific information. Email prosperafrica@usaid.gov. You can learn more at prosperafrica.dfc.gov. These slides.